Hi friend, Cameron here from Small Batch Solutions. And today we're going to take a few moments to show you how to spin up a brand new Node application with TypeScript. So let's begin. Now I've went ahead and already installed the Node application on my box. So if I type in node-v, we'll see that I'm using version 22.16. Now there are obviously newer versions, so you get some additional settings, but this is good enough for right now. Well, first things first, let's go ahead and create that directory. So I'm going to say mkdir project. And we've got a new directory, so I'm going to cd into it. And if we do a dir, there's nothing in here, right? Completely clean. So let's clear the screen. And let's go ahead and initialize. So with Node, you can always do npm init. Now, if you run this, you'll see that you'll get a couple of options that we can use, right? So if we run npm init here, you give it a project name, and you take in some defaults, so on and so forth. But I find that I end up tweaking a lot of these after I get it stood up anyway, and they'll change over time. So I actually don't care what the defaults are. So instead of doing npm init, I'm going to cancel all of that. I'll do npm init --yes. And what this will do is this will go ahead and just create a package JSON file with just some defaults, and then we'll tweak it as we go. So if I do another dir, we've got package JSON. So let's clear the screen. And let's get some tools installed. Now we're using TypeScript, right? Big caveat, starting with Node version 24, it can run TypeScript natively. However, there's some caveats. The first one is it doesn't really do any type checking. It just like outputs and just runs it the way it is. I like to have the type checking as part of my build and deploy step, so we're not going to use that feature out of 24. So we're going to do an npm install save dev, and we're going to type in TypeScript because that's the package we're using, and another library called ts-node. I kind of alluded to this before, but Node out of the box doesn't actually know how to execute TypeScript. It only knows how to execute JavaScript. So you can do some things like using the TypeScript compiler, tsc, have it build, put all that in a distribution folder, and then have Node execute that. You can do all that, or you can just use ts-node. And that's what we're going to use here for today. So we're going to go ahead and install these two libraries. I'm going to hit enter, and we'll give this a few seconds to install some packages. Okay, we've added some packages. And if we do a dir, we'll see that we've got a node modules, package lock, and a package JSON file. The next step that we need to do is we actually need to configure TypeScript. So you can go online and find like a tsconfig.json file, copy it, do all those things. Or we can be lazy and just let the TypeScript compiler generate one for us. And here's how we can do that. So I'm going to type in npx. So if npm is for the package manager for Node, one of the package managers, npx is a command that says, hey, I want you to execute this next thing in the context of this current project. So I'm going to say, hey, in this current project, I want you to execute tsc. That's the TypeScript compiler that got dropped in when we installed TypeScript. And I want you to just initialize a config file for me. And I'm going to pass in that double init flag. I'll hit enter and we'll give this a second. And you see that's already created a ts-config with some just basic settings. Now, there are tons of settings for ts-config. You can make it very strict, very on top of it. I do encourage you to do that at some point, but for what we're doing today, not really that big of a deal. We'll do another dir. We see that we've got a new ts-config file. So I'm going to clear the screen. And the next thing I like to do is let's go ahead and create a source directory. So I'm going to say mkdir source. And at this point, we've got enough stuff that we can actually crack this open in a code editor. So I'm going to be using VS Code, but any code editor should work for the next set of steps. I'm going to type in code and then period. And let's go over to VS Code. All right, in VS Code, you see that we've got just a really basic setup. So I'm going to come in source. We're going to do new file. We're going to type in index.ts for just a basic TypeScript file. And we can do the traditional console hello world. And this will work, but what I found is that this actually isn't sufficient to test that TypeScript's working because notice there's no types. This looks straight up like JavaScript. So instead, I like to write just a really basic function. In our case, we'll say it's add, and it takes in two numbers, A and B. Notice how we're putting some type signatures here. Returns a number, and then we're just going to say return A plus B. And then we'll come down and we're going to do console log, whatever the result of 2 and 2 is. Save the file. And then I'm going to open up a command prompt by doing that control backtick on a Windows box. And I'm going to go ahead and try to run this. So typically you run a Node app by just saying node and then the file. So we'll say node source/index.ts. But when I run that, this immediately bombs out. Now, if I scroll up, the error is pretty obvious. Straight up says, hey, don't know how to process TypeScript files. Okay. So you remember that we installed another package, ts-node. That kind of helps us with that. So let's do that. So I'm going to say npx to once again use ts-node that's part of our project, and I'm going to have it run whatever's in source index.ts. Hit enter, and then give us a second to process. But if everything works, we should get the number 4 printed to the screen. And we do. Awesome. I don't know about you, but typing npx ts-node source index ts is going to get old really fast. So let's go ahead and update our package.json. So I'm going to go to package.json. We're going to define what start means. So in our case, instead of start being like, hey, go run whatever, or run node, we're going to say, yeah, we want you to run ts-node on this particular file. We're going to save package.json. I'm going to come back to my command prompt, do npm start, and if everything works correctly, we should get 4 printed to the screen, and we do. That's awesome. So we've got TypeScript set up and configured and working correctly. We also can execute our Node app, but I hear we're software engineers, and a really common thing that software engineers love to do is write automated tests. We don't have any tests. In fact, if we even look at our test command here, literally says no test specified. So let's fix that. Now there's a ton of different testing libraries out there you can use, but we're going to use Jest. That's a pretty common one. It's used a lot in other applications. So if you know Jest, you pretty much can hold your own anywhere. So let's install those packages. Back in the command prompt, I'm going to do npm install --save dev because these are dev dependencies. We're going to do Jest. I'm going to also install types at type/jest. And even though this doesn't give us any additional functionality, this actually helps the IntelliSense in VS Code, because as we're playing with Jest, it finds that types file, it goes, oh, okay, cool, I know what describes are, I know what its are, I know what those things are. And then we're going to need a third package. Now, Jest is a JavaScript testing library. Knows how it's not a TypeScript testing library. So that means we need some way to convert our TypeScript into JavaScript and bundle it up in such a way that Jest knows how to deal with that. Now you can use tools like Babel and set up all sorts of configuration and that'll work. Or we're going to make this really easy. We're going to use a library called ts-jest. So we're going to install those 3 packages and give that a moment. And just like that, the packages got installed. Now, depending on when you run this command, you may get these messages. I've narrowed these down about why we're getting warnings about in-flight and glob. It's actually coming from the Jest library. And really the problem is that one of the tools that Jest is using under the hood is using some outdated references to in-flight and glob. So unfortunately, as of recording, there's not really much we can do to fix this problem right now. But otherwise, we have Jest set up, so let's go ahead and write a basic test. I'm gonna go back to source, new file. Now, Jest will automatically find files for you if you follow certain naming conventions. The most common one is either .spec.ts or just .test.ts. I like spec, so that's what we're using. And then all Jest tests, right, start with a describe block. So I like to call it the name of the file that we're testing. And then it. You can either use it or test, either one's valid. I like using it, less characters to type. And we're going to just say does add work. Takes in another arrow function, and we'll say const result equals whatever the result of 2 + 2 is. And we better expect that that result to be 4. If it's not, then we've got much bigger problems than just making TypeScript work in the project. Now, do you notice how I had IntelliSense for like describe and it and expect? Yeah, that's happening because we installed that types/jest package. If we didn't do that, VS Code wouldn't be able to help us out at all. We do have one set of angry red squiggly for add, and if we hover over it, it says it can't find it. So I'm just going to go up there, hit Control period on my keyboard, and let's add in that import. Save the file. I'm going to come back to my terminal now, and I'm going to try to run Jest. So that should be easy enough. npx jest. Let's go ahead and run that. All right, so the command finished, and in my case, I got a failing test. If I scrolled up, we get like some really weird error messages. So the first one says something like cannot use import statement outside a module. And if we keep scrolling up, we end up getting like a lot of this helpful information about node modules folder is ignored. Jest was unable to parse a file. This is the real key thing. And so it just really didn't know how to process this. Long story short, this is a long way of saying, hey, Jest doesn't know how to understand TypeScript. So we're going to fix that. Now, for those of you who have experience with Jest, you would normally see a Jest config file here, right? But we don't have one. Well, once again, we can go look up one online, but we're going to cheat and let ts-jest generate one. So I'm going to say npx ts-jest, and then the syntax here is a little bit different. It's literally the word config followed by an int. And then we're going to hit enter, give that a second to process. And you notice that it spat out a Jest config file, and we can take a look at it. And so all this is doing is it's actually getting some defaults from the ts-jest package, and then saying, hey, yeah, we want you to transform files using whatever the transform function is. Now, if you're really interested, you can go look at the code and see what this is doing, but really this is just wiring up the TypeScript in such a way that Jest can work with it. Now, if we go back to our command prompt and do npx jest again, and give that a second, we'll see that it's found the file and it's trying to process it. And if everything works correctly, we should have a passing test, which we do. I believe we also have a little bit of a weird artifact with console log, but that kind of makes sense because our index file is still logging. But yeah, we've actually got that working. But here's the problem. I don't know about you, but I like running my test suite, and I would hate to have to always write npx jest over and over again in the prompt. Plus, that's not super discoverable. So let's go back into our package.json file instead. And remember that test command we had earlier that doesn't really have much? Let's replace that with just the word jest. Save the file. I'm going to make this window a little bit bigger. We're going to come in here and I'm just going to type in npm test. Notice how it's running the jest command that we had before. Give that a few seconds to process. And we still have a passing test suite. And just like that, you've got a working version of a Node app. You could start adding more TypeScript, installing more libraries, start doing everything you need to be successful. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.